From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Oh, g'day everyone. I'll be honest, I had the same plan you did, but none of us won Powerball. $200 million has gone, whether it's been won or not, we'll find out in the next little while. Certainly no, I didn't. But today was the day where people thought they were lined up around the block. How would I spend $200 million? It is the fun thing about playing lotto, despite the fact we all know your chances of forfeits are bugger all. What would I spend $200 million on? I had a whole plan, wonderful ideas, but alas, we'll just have to park those for another day like the rest of Australia. But what about our mates over at Channel 2? Always, super serious people. They put out a news story today that they have reworked tonight. Now, the headline currently reads on the website that, look, lots of people are going to buy, but chances of winning a remote. No. The original version of this headline was that you have more chance of dying tonight than you do of winning Powerball. What a happy lot they are. Now, anyone who's ever gambled knows probably not going to win. But for a couple of hours, you can just dream just a little bit that I'm going to win my slice of the whole whack of 10 million, 20 or 200. Your chances of dying were more likely than winning Powerball. Well done, Channel 2. Always looking for the positive angle, aren't you? Now, a little bit of news that I want to bring you right now, which is, as we know, so often the Prime Minister has talked about how the focus is on cost of living, and we know that that has resulted in the main reason why he says he needs to break his promise when it comes to tax cuts.
A plan to address cost of living, take pressure off cost of living, pressure off the cost of living, cost of living relief, downward pressure on cost of living.
Well, and as we know, 4/5 of bugger all is what people are going to end up, a fistful of dollars, between $15 and $44 a week. And Labor MPs are being told, thanks to the great reporting of Shari, and make sure you watch her each and every night because she's got plenty of stories all the way through the show that become big news in a couple of days' time. So get the first run on it with her at 8 o'clock, then us at 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock, of course, in Queensland. But, well, as the inflation numbers have come out, now her reporting, of course, was that the tax cuts were a solution to cost of living. But you and I both know that's garbage. We've made that point very well. But let's imagine $15 a week was the solution to cost of living. Well, the very same government that is giving with one hand has found a way to take with the other. An eagle-eyed friend of mine, Jason Morrison, who you just saw on with Shari, well, he noticed that there is a plan to increase petrol taxes, and it will start on Monday. You see, whenever the Bureau of Statistics puts out its quarterly inflation numbers, if inflation is at a particular rate, well, the indexation of things to some degrees, like pensions, but certainly to things like taxes, guess what ends up happening? They all go up as well. So we decided to double check this today, and the Australian Tax Office has confirmed that there will be an increase to fuel tax on the 5th of February. 5th of February is Monday. How much are we talking? Now, this may not seem like a lot of money, but follow me through. The current tax rate on petrol is 48.8 cents a litre. It is now going to go up by the best part of a full cent to 49 cents in the dollar. Now, this is the highest rate we have ever charged tax on petrol. In fact, as I say, the old tax, 48, the new tax, 49, but go back to October in 2022, it was 46 cents, and back when they decided to halve the amount of tax, it was just 23 cents in the dollar that was being taken by the federal government. So compare where we were at the election, where it was 23 cents in the dollar, to Monday, where 49.6, rounded up, 50 cents in the dollar of every dollar you purchase petrol is going to the federal government that is apparently focused on cost of living. Now, the average Australian car takes between about 50 and 60 litres. If it's a little bigger, it is a little bigger. And if you fill it up each and every week, the total amount you will now be paying in tax to the federal government on petrol is $1,500. $1,500 a year in tax to the federal government on petrol. Now, they could halve that number if they truly cared about cost of living. They could do it with a stroke of a pen. If it needed to be confirmed by Parliament, no one, probably the Greens, but no one would vote against it. But think about it. All of this song and dance and ballyhoo about tax cuts, which, as we have shown you, when you break them down to what people actually get when they look at their pay packet every week, or if you get paid fortnightly or monthly, you can do the sums. But if you're on $45,000, and supposedly the reason the Prime Minister sold out was to save people on something like $45,000, it's $15 a week. Those people are now facing $1,500 in petrol taxes that have gone up by the same government that is claiming to care about cost of living. Of course, they don't. And in part, one of the reasons why they can turn around and offer this piddling amount of money is because they know it's going to come back to them via things like an increase in petrol taxes. Now, you would think that the Prime Minister, whose word is his bond, who cares about cost of living, who every single day around the cabinet table is searching for ways to save Australians money, well, he would do what the federal government could do to save $3 billion. Now, this is all it would cost. It would cost them $3 billion to halve petrol tax. They could do that for 6 months. Remember, last year they had a surplus of $20 billion. They'll have another surplus this year coming. Yet still, they took $1,500 off you last year. They're now giving you back $15 a week. And now they're going to increase petrol taxes on the average Australian to $1,500 a year. The Prime Minister has been asked directly about whether he would follow this policy. It will not break the bank, but it will help people with cost of living. Instead, no changes when it comes to indexation. Because you see, they want to look like Robin Hood on one side, and then they're the Robin Hood on the other side as well. You are both the rich and the poor in this story. Let alone the sheer hypocrisy of a Prime Minister who, when he was applying for the job, was ramping up pressure on the previous federal government that ultimately resulted in petrol taxes being halved for the best part of 6 months, when he was aggro about petrol prices being, what, $1.79 in some parts of Sydney. Remember his tweet way back when? Do you reckon Scott Morrison has been to a petrol station lately? Petrol prices are surging on his watch. Well, what do we now say about Anthony Albanese when, if you check today on the NRMA, RACQ or RACV website, that the average price for unleaded in Sydney's $2.17 tonight, it's $2.07 in Melbourne, and it's $2.07 in Brisbane. Petrol is high. They could cut tax, but they won't, because if you're paying $2 a litre, then it turns out that $1 of every litre ends up being taxation. It's crazy, right? But $1,500 you're going to pay. I should say, sorry, 50 cents. But you end up paying those taxes. So, surprise, surprise, their word is not their bond. It is all BS. It is all spin. They don't care because they, of course, are either driven around in a chauffeured car or they get paid by you and I, the taxpayer, for them to fill their car up, and they don't even look what the price is. Meantime, people who supposedly all of the past couple of weeks have been about have got $15 a week extra to help pay for the very petrol that is going up in price and up in tax. That's why I don't believe these people. Never have, never will. Meantime, also in and around the tax games, we need to talk about this. The Prime Minister and the Treasurer, well, they're kind of laughing all the way to the proverbial bank because, again, these little slight tax increases here and bracket creep that they plan to change means they can keep spending record amounts of money. They are saved constantly by, say, the return of the Future Fund or the surge in resources that are around. And despite the fact that the Prime Minister says this...
My word is my bond.
We all know it's not.
Broken promise.
Broken a key election promise.
Breaking a promise.
Broken promise.
Now, there's no news in all of this, but the new bit today is that because they broke this central promise that they went to 2 elections saying they would deliver, but once they were safe in power, they could assume that their own magnificence would mean they could afford to break the promise, and the price of your integrity is $15 a week that you will somehow forgive because, thank goodness, I got that extra $15 a week. Well, today we learn that everything should be on the table when it comes to taxation in the country. Now, we've heard of all of this before. Remember when it was one of the stupid things that Turnbull did way back when he was Prime Minister? Was everything's on the table and then slowly but surely everything came off the table? Well, of course, this includes, among other things, people that are pushing, the same people who pushed for the changes in the stage 3 tax cuts to break that promise, are now wanting the government to break its promise on negative gearing. Now, negative gearing is a very expensive policy when it comes to the budget, but people planning for their retirement through purchasing investment properties is a significant way that Australians are able to amass as much as they possibly can, so when they play financial kaplunk towards the end of their life, they can pay for a happy retirement. Now, for most Australians, they only may well end up with 1, maybe 2 investment properties, but you're constantly told there's some sort of moustache-twirling billionaire who's costing the federal budget trillions of dollars because they've got 2, 3, 4 or 5. Now, we know that one of the ways that Chris Bowen, thank goodness, never became Treasurer, and Bill Shorten wanted to fix the federal budget was to say that everyone who's currently on negative gearing, fine, but following the day we get elected, no new arrangements. Now, of course, the result of that was Australians turned around and said, no, because this is a plan that I have for my kid to be able to make a little bit of extra money, so towards the end of their life they will end up with more money than I had, so they can have a better retirement than I had. Not because they're evil and don't care about homeless people. So now we have to believe the very same people who lied to you about the tax cuts and getting rid of bracket creep are now pretending they will definitely not go anywhere near negative gearing.
Oh, we're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
Now, you know and I know that when a friend of yours, or maybe even your kid, or worst case your partner, isn't telling you the truth, you can generally tell because they're not quite looking you in the eye. In fact, can we play that grab again, right? Now, remember, if the government is absolute, they would be able to say, no, this is garbage, not going to happen. If it happens, I resign. Instead, old Grim Jim gets a little shifty, doesn't he?
Oh, we're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
Now, the reason this matters is because Treasurer Jim Chalmers has got form of what he really thinks about negative gearing. In fact, he said it in front of a camera. So which Chalmers do you believe? The one who looks down when answering the question, or the bloke who says this?
But any housing policy that doesn't deal with negative gearing and capital gains tax is a sham. Housing affordability, which doesn't make important and considered changes to capital gains and negative gearing, has a hole in the middle of it. If you want to deal with housing affordability, you need to start with negative gearing and capital gains.
So apart from the fact that we know that it's what they believe in, what they've argued for in the past, and we know that what they promised they broke, it means then that the government has to answer questions like this today on the Today Show. But again, watch the answer. No, hell no, I'll resign if we do it, is the answer. But you get this out of the people making the same decisions who broke the promise on tax last week.
Do you mind repeating after me this morning, there will be no changes to negative gearing under our government?
We have no plans to do that, Carl. We don't. We've got a full tax reform.
It's not what I asked. Would you mind repeating after me? There will be no changes to negative gearing under my government.
Well, it's not my government, it's the Albanese government, and we have no plans on negative gearing.
Oh, we have no plans. What about we will not? The very political argument right now that they think they can win with $15 of your own money for the lowest income workers amongst us, $44 a week for those that are apparently the evil people earning over 100 and above. They think that they can buy your sense of right and wrong, a promise broken versus a promise kept, for that small amount of money. So now they're coming out, and when they are being asked these questions, they can't say no. Hell no, I will resign if it ever happens. You see, that's when you know that a politician is actually committed to what they're saying. It's when they give themselves the little wiggle room so that if, for whatever reason, in 2 months, 2 years or 5 years, they have to change the policy. It's not a broken promise because we didn't have a plan back then to do it, but we have a plan to do it now. And the very same people who have pushed for the broken promise to happen around bracket creep are the same people now saying, yet again, everything's on the table. Everything from unions to backbenchers in the parliament who are saying that things like negative gearing must change. So again, who do you believe? The Treasurer, who said how many times in a row that any housing policy without negative gearing changes or capital gains tax is a sham? An MP in the back benches of the parliament who believes that they desperately need to make that change? Or the politician saying we don't have a plan to do that? And I notice as well the leaking is now starting to come out of Treasury, you know, Jim Chalmers' public servants, trying to seed a potential change in negative gearing. These people honestly think that you can't watch what is happening and you don't know when somebody's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Well, we both know that you can spot them a mile away and your BS detector is currently at 11 on these people. So good luck to a Prime Minister whose word is his bond, but his broken promise is his CV when he tries to lie to you about why you should trust him.
Trust is something that needs to be earned. But once it's lost, it's very hard to get it back. The fact is that people can't trust Scott Morrison. Who do you trust? Who do you trust? You just can't trust this government.
I will lead a government that rewards people's hard work and repays their trust.
Fair dinkum. Now, I have deliberately not said a word about the Malcolm Turnbull view of the Liberal Party that is airing in 3 parts currently on the ABC. But I'm going to talk about it now, and in fact, I have not seen a frame of it. I will never see a frame of it because I have no interest in the Malcolm Turnbull view of things. But of course, my friend has been talked about very poorly for a very long period of time by the same people that will feature inside this program. It's my friend Peter Credlin and our colleague Peter Credlin. Now, I, like you, love watching her each and every night. But obviously my association with her goes back into the political days when we were communicating when she was in the Leader of the Opposition's office and, of course, then the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Now, you don't need me to tell what you see each and every night, that Peta is a fabulous lady, a lady with more steel in her spine than most people you will ever meet, but a person who's absolutely clear about what is right and wrong for the country. But I cannot let it pass yet again that the same broken people who've said the nastiest things about my friend are doing it again. The same people who traded in rumour and garbage about her in order to bring down the person that she was working for, who all still continue to get free access to microphones and newspaper columns. So I just wanted to say publicly what I have said privately to her the whole time that we have known each other, and certainly this week, is that Peta is a friend of mine and Peta is a wonderful woman, a woman who literally has sacrificed for the betterment of her country. And the nastiness that has been thrown her way and gets reheated again via this documentary is disgusting. Now, she's written very classily about this today, and she did so by speaking about it on television tonight. Please go and check it out at our website, skynews.com.au. But I love you, Peta. Always have, always will.
It hurts so much to see the party used by carpetbaggers and careerists who should never have been given the honour of Liberal Party pre-selection in the first place. And in the process, to have my own reputation attacked. Everything was used against me. Even my years on IVF by lowlifes like Clive Palmer. As I said today, some days I honestly don't know how I managed to survive. And I mean that literally.
Well, we are all the better that you found the strength, you never gave in to the haters, and you rise and you rise and you rise via the Australian and here at Sky News each and every night. We love you, and she doesn't need me to say publicly. She's a strong woman in every possible way, but her beautiful husband Brian and her friends and family around her know that she's one of the best one of the best people you can possibly meet. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman, and I give her nothing but endless love and support all day, every day, on air and off air, as she does for me. She's a good mate. Now, as always, when it comes to politics, I always say pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Right? Perfect example is this incredible story which has come out about a hospital visit by the Victorian Health Minister. Now, the Victorian Health Minister was apparently visiting a regional hospital, but the claim is that there weren't enough people that were in the hospital as patients. So a bunch of people who had a connection to the hospital ended up playing the role of patients. Now, whether the Minister's office knew this or whether it was what the locals were doing to gin up a story, who knows? But now it's being investigated by the Corruption Commission, and rightly so, in in Victoria. The Department of Health is investigating the allegations that 10 patients claiming in the Colac area health staff, claimed to be Colac area health staff and family members, they were admitted into a hospital bed and pretended to be sick for the visit. The department is aware of the complaint and has made and continues to investigate the allegations. Well, interestingly, they'll obviously be investigating themselves, but what does that say? Spin, spin, spin is always what's more important to a certain type of politician. And at the moment, with Labor state governments everywhere, we have to say it is peculiar and it is particular to the Labor Party right now in the way that they try to trick you about their attitudes towards the health system. Now, you and I both know that the health system is not what it used to be. Now, it ain't third world. And it's great that we have Medicare that means, frankly, in Australia, you're going to be able to get fixed. But the delays are too long and the problems are too deep. And Labor governments that have got the unions on their side should be able to come up with the solutions to fix these health problems. Goodness knows, how often do we get told about how many $1 billion extra here or hundreds of millions of dollars there, yet the problem gets worse. And there's no better example of it than ambulance ramping. We have this absurd situation in Australia where every state in the country has got a problem with people who can't get an ambulance because someone's sitting in an ambulance and the ambulance is sitting in a hospital because there's no bed in the freaking hospital. And Queensland, in particular, is really bad. And the same government has been there for the best part of 30 years. There was a one-termer a long time ago in the LNP, but Labor's been in charge for how long? The population has surged, the taxes have surged, yet the problem gets worse. And every time this story comes up, you hear the same garbage from people who've been promising for years to fix a problem that has happened on their watch and gets worse.
So that's since our $764 million plan came out at budget to tackle ramping.
This is all about relieving the pressure on our emergency departments.
We get people out of those ambulances quicker.
So the face has changed, the spin stays the same, the result gets worse. And remember, in Queensland there have been 3 people in the space of just a couple of weeks who died as a result of this scenario, where you can't get the ambulance to turn up because there's an ambulance with somebody in it at a hospital and there's no bed in the hospital, which means the ambulance stays in the hospital. So now we see that the wait for some people to get an ambulance in Queensland is now more than 25 minutes. So good luck if you're having a heart attack. Good luck if you've been bitten by a snake. Good luck if you've stumbled and fallen. Queenslanders are now waiting longer for ambulances than any other time in the past decade, with the state service under the highest demand in the country. Now, there is a state election in Queensland this year, and there will be many reasons the Labor Party will throw at you for why they should be re-elected. But the same people in charge of the same system that's been getting worse, this issue alone is a reason to vote them out and scrub them from history. Yet no doubt they will turn around and say that if you don't vote for us, somehow the Olympics will disappear. Well, guess what's disappearing? Your capacity to get an ambulance if you live in Queensland. But it's not the only example of this stuff. You see, we keep being told, again, health, absolutely essential to Australians when it comes to voting. But sometimes we vote against our own interests. Again, regardless of how bad the opposition was or how smart alecky the politics was in Victoria. Victoria decided to re-elect a government that had overseen a O system where 33 people died as a result of not being able to get an ambulance. So Australia, if you care about your health, even though you may not need an ambulance today, you might need one tomorrow. which means you need a government that can guarantee it will turn up. And the current Labor government of Queensland cannot do it and has made it worse. The current government in South Australia promised to fix it but didn't. In Western Australia, it's the worst it's ever been. And so on and so on and so on in virtually every state in the country. So if your health matters, if the health of your parents or your kids or your partner or yourself matters, then forget the spin and the BS. Anyone who has presided over this failure goes. May that be the case at the election later this year in Queensland. Quick break. Plenty more to talk about, and as well, we'll have a chat this evening with Dave Rubin, our Gen X mate from the United States. But it's a ladies' night this evening. We'll get to it with Jenna Clark, Linda Scott and Christy McSweeney. We're just getting started. I'm in a mood tonight because I didn't win Powerball. But you're the same. More in a sec. Well, I didn't get the memo it was Orange Night because we have two ladies who are a couple dressing, and that's nice to see. Jenna Clark, of course, from the Australian newspaper, and Linda Scott, who's happily married to somebody else, by the way, with the City of Sydney Council. Christy McSweeney joining us from the PR Council in Melbourne. Ladies, let's get into this. So, how hard is it to say no? All right? Now, I've uphill and down dale at the start of the show, right? Which is, if at the moment the issue the federal government is dealing with is can we trust you, right? That's a rather significant issue, especially on the issue of tax. When you get asked about any changes, you say, no, hell no, I'll resign before there'll be any changes. Instead, we got this from Katie Gallagher this morning. Roll the tape.
Do you mind repeating after me this morning, there will be no changes to negative gearing under our government?
We have no plans to do that, Carl. We don't. We've got a full tax reform.
It's not what I asked. Would you mind repeating after me? There will be no changes to negative gearing under my government.
Well, it's not my government, it's the Albanese government, and we have no plans on negative gearing.
Now, yeah, I get it. The repeat after me thing, a little low rent, but still. If the trust is the issue, which it is for a lot of people right now, there's a way to answer, and it's not that.
No. Look, Katie Gallagher, normally a very good performer on her feet in the chamber and also in the media. So when she sort of stumbled on that, and the first thing that came out of her mouth was, whoa, 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 not my government, Albanese's government. She's fairly and squarely placing this at the foot of the Prime Minister. I think Carl really caught her on the hop there. And the fact that it looks like that the relationship between Jim and Katie seems to be deteriorating, because whether the communication has broken down and they haven't got their lines together is one thing. But I think everyone now is scrambling because all of a sudden the honeymoon is finally over with the Albanese government.
Correct. Well and truly, I think we're well and truly past first fight stage with the Australian people at the moment. But again, Christy, you've run for office, you've spoken, you've advised people in both politics and in the private sector. Now, again, it's pretty simple. If you asked me a question, Paul, any plans for this show to go to Channel 2? Hell no, and I'd resign before the chat. There's a pretty clear way you respond when you are put a proposition that you vehemently disagree with, or you absolutely want people to know is not going to happen. But especially when you match it back in with what Chalmers has said in the past about negative gearing, it opens itself up, doesn't it?
It certainly does open itself up, and it's weasel political language, and it's a way that politicians speak that doesn't lock them into having something said on the record that they then later want to retract or sidestep around. The real story here, of course, is that Katie Gallagher is a dominant member of the left faction, the Albanese faction in the caucus and in the cabinet. Jim Chalmers is a dominant member of the right faction. We know that he is gathering numbers and he's out selling the tax cuts for his life, and he's doing a very good job. He's an excellent media performer. And Albanese's faction with Katie having very much an eye on the internal machinations of Labor, with the Treasurer being front and centre in the media. Sure, he's selling their agenda, but the more exposure he gets, the better his numbers go up in the caucus and the Labor membership base at a time when the Prime Minister seems to be flailing.
I mean, we're in a scenario, of course, we can't pretend that the Labor Party leadership rules aren't different than what they were before, and it's like, 75% of caucus and only on the second blue moon of the month. We all get what the thresholds are, so I'm not going to go too far down that track, but I just want to go back to that idea, Linda, which is not dismissing what you just said there, Christy, about the long-term game, right? That is clearly what's happening, and I'm not dismissing other people's reporting. But I just want to focus in again, Linda. How hard is it just to say no?
Look, I like Karl Stefanovic a lot. I want to be clear about that. But sometimes even Karl shouldn't repeat his own words. They will get him into trouble. Of course, the Albanese government is focused on giving every Australian taxpayer a tax cut. That's what they're focused on. They're focused on changing the tax package that was proposed by and, voted for the Conservatives.
That they voted for?
To a tax package in light of the very different economic circumstances we're in that mean that Middle Australia are going to get a bigger tax cut, and that, unlike the other proposal, they're going to give a tax cut to every working Australian. Now, that is a really significant thing. They've been provided advice by Treasury that it's not going to impact inflation. So this
because
is
it's so small,
sensible approach. And it's going to give relief to people who need it. I think that's a really good thing. Now, the media, of course, respectfully loves to play kind of rule in, rule out.
But you know how to bat it up.
After me. But that's not how people should govern.
But you know how this works, right? I'm going to say to you, you're potentially a mayoral candidate for the City of Sydney, right? Is there any plans to bring the monorail back to Sydney?
Well, that's a state government responsibility, so,
But your answer would be no.
Who is who, right?
Okay, do you want to put a swimming pool in the middle of George Street? No. Okay, see what I mean? That's the point.
It's a different question, isn't it? It is a different question, right? This is a talk show host in a morning television show playing fantastic gotcha games.
Sure, but the minister
a very
falls
senior
into
member
the game.
of the Albanese government.
So this is my point, though.
You've just heard, right? Let's be clear. You've just heard Liberals trying to explode this into leadership and things that it absolutely, patently is not. What we should be focusing on, what the government is focusing on, is cost of living relief and support for Middle Australia in a time of really challenging inflation.
Yeah, but again,
and people want to distract from that agenda, but it's very important to recognise that people are struggling. I've got a support service in my area, in Newtown, in the City of Sydney. They put out a post today needing fruit.
Yes,
because
correct.
They're talking about
but is the federal government giving them the money for it?
Afford fruit.
But they've got a $20 billion surplus, and as I've argued before, is that if they turn around and say, OK, we've got this $20 billion extra, one of the things we can do is we're going to give people back their $1,500 that we took away last year. Then we're going to give more money to aid groups like the ones that we're talking about because we've got that little bit extra, and we'll reduce fuel prices. But as I just explained at the start of the show, again, yes, it's a 1 cent difference, but that's the whole point. Is it's just 1 cent. Don't look. If the total tax take from the federal government in the next 12 months for the average person be $1,500 when it comes to petrol, we're all about cost of living, then maybe they could pull their head in on that issue. But it is worth noting, again, where you've got this scenario here where you've got all the same people who argued against stage 3 are now turning around and starting to flood the zone with why negative gearing, et cetera, needs to change.
Yeah.
So you would think these people would have just a modicum of sense to let the government sell their first broken promise before demanding they make another one.
I did find it quite interesting that Allegra Spender sort of stood up at the National Press Club demanding
is it
full
because
tax reform.
Catherine Murphy works for them now? That they just think if we put it in the thing, then she'll just run it into Albo's office? Come on.
Yeah, look, it is. But what also gets me is that you can kind of feel that the tension is even brewing between the state premiers now with the Prime Minister as well. I mean, we saw Stephen Miles out today and also WA Premier Roger Cook coming out and saying, yeah, we need to do making sure that Reserve Bank really drive down inflation and things like that. WA alone is on a $5 billion operating surplus. So I think Mr Cook probably needs to look in his own backyard before he starts knocking on the door of the RBA.
Don't start me on WA politics. More than happy to spend an hour on it, though. So the Sydney Biennale has decided that one of the ways that they are going to have an event this year is that they're going to try to spin that Gallipoli and World War I was all about trying to push back against Muslims, as opposed to, clearly, the tactical decision about trying to push back against the wider enemy. We all know they landed in the wrong spot, but this is actually a wild position that actually some more nationalist and fundamentalist MPs have in the Turkish Parliament, which is that the Australian recognition of Gallipoli in and around Anzac Day is offensive because this was Christians trying to invade an Islamic country, and clearly that seems to have been in part what the Biennale is going to play with. Now, Christy, I have no doubt that for most people watching right now, the word Biennale may be one that they are Googling as we speak. But again, these organisations turn around and try to find ways to recast history. Now, if anyone thinks that World War I and Australia landing at Gallipoli was a bunch of Christians going after the Muslims, then they have no idea what they're talking about, yet they get the cash anyway.
Absolutely. And just to clarify, it's an art show for toffs who are probably the same people who are annual members of the Sydney Theatre Company who probably embraced their decision to do themselves out of significant donations and government funding by making a pro-Palestine stance on a play that had absolutely nothing to do with the issue. So now we see the Sydney Biennale trying to spin history to suit a fashionable artistic agenda, which is not an agenda befitting an organisation that promotes and stages a cultural event to be enjoyed by all Australians across New South Wales in particular, to take such a partisan line and make such a significant public statement on a subject that is not related to the Biennale whatsoever.
But again, it's this thing, Linda, where the recasting and the constant demand to recast what they believe as sort of national narratives or fairy tales that we've told ourselves about the Anzacs, there is no part of it that was the Christians invading the Muslims.
Look, as much as I might totally disagree with the premise of the show, I think the purpose of great artistic works is to challenge the status quo, and they do that sometimes from the left, and sometimes they do that from the right, and sometimes they just, upend things.
What about there are only two genders? That could be a show to challenge the narrative at the moment.
I mean, I also
if they really want to be edgy.
I want to defend the Sydney Theatre Company too. These are really important institutions. These are really, really important creative institutions in Sydney, and they do great work. Now, from time to time, understandably, they provoke audiences, members, subscribers, donors, a whole lot of people to think about issues, and it's a particularly difficult time. I want to acknowledge for people who are interested, have loved ones, have strong views, very understandably, about the Middle East. But this is the important role of our cultural institutions, and I don't think we should be in the job of censoring them, and I certainly don't think...
No, but we should just keep funding them so they turn around and middle finger us.
You know what? I certainly don't think
that's what we should do every time.
Should be in the role of using government funding to censor creativity and artistic institutions.
So then fine, stand it up, find a sponsor, fill the tickets, sell it, and you wouldn't need it. But in the same way that as I've said before, if a religious school wants to still turn around and I love the argument here, right? Which is that if a religious school wants to take a position on a homosexual teacher or homosexual students, people say cut their funding, move them out because $1 of funding means ... Well, $1 of funding means ... in this scenario as well. That's my point here. Again, I'm all for free speech. We're all up for free speech. You can do what you want. But when you're doing it with the hand out, then you don't get to turn around and just constantly bite the hand that feeds.
And it is really interesting when you talk about, especially sponsorship now of things like sporting associations and cultural institutions. We're seeing a lot of people say it's fine for them to receive public money, but when it comes to those big organisations such as the mining and gas companies that want to throw all of their surplus cash at them, that's then another cultural divisive issue rears its ugly head. So again, it's kind of like, well, where is this middle ground?
Well, but there is no middle ground, because what ends up happening is that we keep constantly funding these things that end up trying to spit back in our face. Or we turn around and, like, again, I'm going to do a little bit of Western Australia shout out right now. Remember the museum? Because the Chinese government complained about one of the descriptions of the pandemic, the Western Australian government turns around and changes it. It's like, well, you're not going to see a scenario here where this Biennale is going to turn around and say, asterisk, the local RSL disagrees with this depiction of.
Well, they should, and I think...
But of course they won't.
Yeah.
That's my raging point.
Well, they will now.
Well, yeah, we'll see. But okay, now, again, let's talk here about what seems at times to be a gulf between what people say and how they vote, right? Which is, for a long period of time, people always tell you that health will be in the top 3 issues constantly of why people make a decision to vote the way that they do. Now, currently at the state governments, they've decided to go Labor everywhere, and you'd assume that the Labor Party would be able to make peace with the unions and the public servants to be able to fix central problems in everything from education to hospitals. But we have a scenario now where today, 25-minute waits for ambulances in Queensland, the longest it's ever been. Ramping in Western Australia, the worst it's ever been. Ramping in South Australia, the worst it's been in a decade. What do all these things have in common? The very unions that helped get the Labor Party into power, that bitched and moaned about this system, say nothing when it gets worse. So, Linda, is this one of those issues where, and sometimes it does exist, where polling tells you something but reality tells you something else? For example, polling will say, I demand the federal debt be cut. Well, what would you cut from the federal budget? Nothing at all. Yet it polls well that we should do something about federal debt. Does the obvious idea that we keep returning governments that are looking over a system getting worse shows maybe they don't really believe it, or they just think it happens to everyone else because it's going to happen to them?
I think that it's because voters are smart and they recognise that in this very unusual economic time with very high inflation, there are huge cost pressures. There are increases in wages. That's a very welcome thing. But that, of course, means for state and territory governments and local governments, I might add, that the cost of building things, maintaining infrastructure, running our services just costs a whole lot more. And the reality in this country is that the Commonwealth Government collects the overwhelming amount of the tax take. Like local government collects 4% as an example of
so
our
you would think that when
tax take.
they're all the same brand and have been for 18 months, again, we'd start to see something here. But Christy, we don't.
Enough to recognise it's not about brand. It's there's a big economic challenge.
But I'm saying is that we keep constantly rewarding politicians who say, trust me because of X billion dollars. Reality of their system, you can't get a freaking ambulance.
Anywhere, seemingly. And of course, if you're a regional Queenslander, you have just about given up hope of getting adequate medical treatment. If you're a woman in regional Australia, you have given up hope of having the best medical care when you need it in times of women's health emergencies. It's absolutely disgraceful that the health system is not the number one agenda item on National Cabinet, or that the premiers aren't constantly getting together, figuring out how to solve the cost shifting one way forever. And I think that when all governments of any side have a red wall or a blue wall across Australia, and we're sorry, with the exception to Tasmania, but they're hanging on by a thread and there's a minority scenario there. I think it's incumbent upon them to solve these huge public policy issues and to exact good government in a federal, state, bipartisan way that is so important to Australians, such as getting adequate health care.
I'm with you. Ladies, I'd be in a better mood if I won Powerball, but alas, we all didn't. So, we just power on, don't we? Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. Thank you. We'll talk to you all again very soon. Have a great weekend. Quick break. After that, none other than the wonderful Dave Rubin talking about all things America in a sec. Our favourite Gen Xer is not the bloke hosting the show, it's the bloke talking to the guy hosting the show. The whole point is it's a strange way of saying hello to Dave Rubin, one of our mates in the United States and the Freedom State. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. I'm a little confused by that intro. You are a Gen Xer too. I do host a show, not this show. We'll just see what we can do here.
Yeah, correct. All right. Well, let's best forget the intro. I apologise. So Disney came up with a thing called the Wheel of Privilege. Apparently it was something for their staff, but what the hell is the Wheel of Privilege?
Paul, if the woke Disney movies are not enough, they have decided to incorporate wokeism into every part of their company. Every employee must be hired based on skin color and gender and sexuality and all that. And you can guess what the Wheel of Privilege is. And when you spin the wheel, you can figure out how privileged you are. And if you're privileged, I don't know, does that mean you get a smaller portion at lunch? joking aside, the fact that this set of ideas has infected what should be really the owner of all of the culturally important stories and movies and cartoons and everything else is a really damaging situation for the entire world, because we tell our truths through stories, and people have kind of had it, which is why the box office on Disney's last couple of movies, especially the woke ones, have been pretty terrible.
Well, and I've got mates who just have got rid of the Disney Plus app. They don't watch the movies anymore. They're overtly trying to send a message back up to the company. Look, I have to break up with you until you change your act. And it is really the only thing that's going to get them to change their act is we don't want them to go broke because of their rich storytelling history, right? But we do want them to realise that they can't just take for granted that they've got the world's kids.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the beauty of the capitalist system, which of course the woke hate, is that you as a participant in the system can decide where to put your dollars. And at the end of the day, although the Disney employees or the higher-ups at Disney may think of themselves as some plush, soft, lovely company that doesn't really care about money, it only cares about diversity and equity and inclusion, at the end of the day, the board members and the shareholders care about cold, hard cash. So much like in the boycott of Bud Light here in America, you actually are a participant in the way that these companies behave. And that's actually pretty great. So I don't know that Disney itself will ever come back from this stuff, because, it's like when you see the woke stuff happen at Harvard or some of these other universities, it infects the entire host. So I don't know that Disney will ever come back, but I'm certainly a betting man in capitalism and people's ability to think for themselves, and that there will be another Disney down the pike. Someone else will come up with some new stuff and not just have to reboot Star Wars for the 80th time, and not just take Snow White and make her genderqueer or whatever they're doing to her now.
Yeah, correct.
Something.
Now, Korea, what is it? How do we pronounce her name? I always get this wrong, right? Which is Corinne Jean-Pierre, right?
Yes.
All right. So this is the White House spokesperson. Let's be polite here. She's a diversity hire, and she's terrible at her job. Every time things get tough, she's reading, looking for the serious things. Whenever there's a serious event, they sort of push it to one side, and a national security spokesperson ends up talking. And that would be proven by her most recent nonsense about the troops that were killed this week.
Obviously, our deepest condolences go out, and our heartfelt condolences go out to the families who lost three folks who are military folks, who are brave, who are always fighting, who are fighting on behalf of this administration.
Yeah, it's funny because I used to like making fun of her, and it was just sort of easy, and now I've come to sort of respect the fact that they hired her in the first place, because yes, she was a diversity hire. She happens to be a black lesbian. She's clearly not qualified to do this job. It's an important job to be the press spokesman for the White House, to be able to communicate the ideas of the White House. But in this case, there were these 3 soldiers killed in Jordan by a drone, about 30 other soldiers injured, and she fumbled through this talk and basically said that they gave their lives for the administration. And that is one of the craziest statements that I have ever heard from someone in the United States government. When these servicemen become part of the military, Navy, Army, doesn't matter, they are serving the country, not the administration. Administrations come and go. Joe Biden will be but a footnote in history, but the United States government, that is the thing. They, swearing on the Constitution or swearing on the Bible to uphold the laws of the Constitution and then defend our freedoms all the way across the world. And she thinks that they died for the administration. I mean, it's actually, even for her, this one was a bit much.
Thank you, Dave. We'll see you, of course, on the Rubin Report on Rumble and all over the place. And we'll see you here next week as well. Thanks, mate.
Good to see you, my friend.